Everybody, thank you so much for joining here on Zoom Goes the History. This is a special edition. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. I'm Garry Adelman, and we're really happy to have our special guest and our good friend, Jeff Shaara. Thanks so much for joining us, Jeff.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
We're going to outline a little bit about who you are and why we're talking to you, but I think most of the people coming on here already know that. But, until we do first, the most burning question right now, what does a writer do during a pandemic where there's stay-at-home orders?
Well, the nice thing for me, I mean, if there's anything nice in this whole situation, and there really isn't much, is, I work out of my house. So I'm sitting in my office right now, and I'm able to work, and I don't take that for granted because I know there are a whole bunch of people that are not. The other thing I do is I grow a beard, which is probably a big mistake, and I'm going to get rid of this thing because it's driving me crazy. But I figure, well, I'm here, I might as well, take a shot at what I look like, scruffy. But no, I mean, I'm very fortunate that I can work out of my house, and so being locked in is, for me, not a bad thing.
Okay, so I mean, in the unlikely event, and we see a lot of people coming on now here on, Zoom Goes the History. I just want to make sure people know a little bit about who you are. You're born in Jersey. You grew up in Florida and majored in criminology, and then got into rare coins, and actually were a rare coin dealer in the 1980s. Is that right?
Yeah, even actually earlier than that. No, I started in the coin business as a kid. I mean, I was 16 years old and started a mail order business. It actually helped put me through college at Florida State. And once I graduated from FSU, I was enjoying the coin business more than anything else going on. So I kept at it and kept at it up until almost 1990 when I finally got out. But yeah, it was a good thing to do. It was fun. I enjoy it still. I still, do little coin deals here and there when something comes up. So it's a part of my DNA, I think.
Good. And, I know we're going to speak, to some degree about your father, Michael Shaara, but, in continuing a little bit with who you are, everything changed, of course, not only with the success that he attained in the Pulitzer Prize, but then, of course, with his death in 1988, you became a writer, and then eventually, that led you into a whole new profession, which is really what brings us together today.
Well, yeah, and boy, talk about something I don't take for granted. Extremely fortunate. I mean, my father was a writer all his life. Started as a 20-year-old writing short stories, sci-fi stuff. He wrote one great book, The Killer Angels, but it was not successful. And, so people have asked me all the time, did you always want to be a writer? Absolutely not. Because growing up in the house of a man who hated the writing industry and was always in a fight with publishers and agents, and there was no incentive for me to ever want to do that. But a man wins a Pulitzer Prize, and you think, okay, he's finally gotten some validation. His ship's come in, but nothing changed for him. The Killer Angels was not a successful book until the film came out. The film Gettysburg, based on the book, came out in 1993, 5 years after his death. So he didn't live to see any of that. He didn't live to see his book become a #1 bestseller. So it's, those are the footsteps I'm walking in, and I take that very seriously.
Yeah, so we had our viewers submit questions, and we got hundreds and hundreds of questions, and you've seen some of them already. And I know, Jeff, if I know you at all, you're probably going to read them all so you can see them, and we'll talk about your fan interaction a little bit later. But we got a whole lot of questions about, sort of your father. We got a lot of questions about your process. We got questions about history and about what's coming for the future. So we'll make sure we cover all of those. But just first, I mean, we've got a lot of questions about your father, and I want to thank all the members of the American Battlefield Trust for submitting these. It was a very overwhelming response, some of y'all are going to win some books today, as a matter of fact. But really, I've heard you talk about this before, your father's influence, but specifically, what was the BIC method of writing? That's, I think, BIC?
Right. My father taught creative writing at Florida State. And one of the lessons, or two lessons, he would always teach his students. And one was, if you're going to be a writer or try to be a writer, tell a good story. Doesn't matter what you're writing about, what your topic is, who your subjects are. If it's not a good story, why would anybody want to read it? But the second thing is, and I've run into this myself, when people sort of whine a little bit about, oh, I want to write a book, but I just don't know what to do. And I don't know how to, what are the techniques, books you read to learn how to be a writer? No. What my father taught his students is what I've told people as well, the BIC method, B-I-C, butt in chair. It's not going to happen. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're Hemingway. It's not going to happen unless your butt is in the chair. And even if you have no confidence or you don't think you can write, I was there, believe me, until you put your butt in the chair and put your hands on a keyboard or a typewriter or even a pen, nothing's going to happen.
That's great. And I think that a lot of people probably imagine you sitting on your father's lap, and he's saying, here, son, here's how you write, and here's how you write exactly like me. And in fact, one of our, members actually asked, how did you develop your style so that you could write like him? Do you think you write like your father?
The first person who really pointed that out was my sister. She said, this is when she read Gods and Generals, the first manuscript of Gods and Generals, and she said, this is being written by the ghost of Michael Shaara. But then, people have said, well, how hard is it to copy your father's style? And it doesn't work. You can't do that. If you copy anyone, whoever it might be, you try to copy someone else's style, it ends up being all about style and no substance. Because all your energy is going into the copying. And so I just started to write, and the voice that came out of me was certainly a voice that had been influenced by my father my whole life. So, I didn't set out to do that, but one of the greatest compliments that someone pays me is to say they read Gods and Generals, they read Killer Angels, they read Last Full Measure, so they read the whole trilogy, and it was seamless. I love that word. And that's not me, that's not contrived on my part of trying to make it seamless. It's just the way I write. It's just the way it came out.
Great. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. This is Zoom Goes the History, a special interview with Jeff Shaara. I would call out all the people I know watching on Facebook, but there's too many. I can't possibly do so. So thanks everybody for joining, and thanks everybody for submitting your questions both in advance, and we'll also look for some as we stream here on Facebook. Somebody asked a very particular question about the Killer Angels, noting, because they can see from your bio that you might have been at an age where you could have helped your father actually write the Killer Angels. Were you involved at all?
Well, there's two answers to that. I mean, first of all, I never would ever take credit for any contribution to the Killer that made the Killer Angels what it is. That was my father's monument and will always be. So for me to say, well, I was there, no. I mean, I would never do that. On the other hand, I was with my father in Gettysburg. He had had his first heart attack in 1965. And so when we were there in the late 60s, 1970, when he was researching the Killer Angels on the battlefield, he was in pretty rough shape. And he couldn't do a lot of things. He couldn't climb Round Top, things like that. I'm the kid. So that was, I'm doing the grunt work. So he would say, oh, go up that hill. Tell me what's up there. Tell me what the monuments are. That's what I would do. That is the sum total of my involvement in the Killer Angels.
Wow. So I would ask people, because you just noted on a few things, about your father's legacy. If you're watching right now and, you were first, your spark, that got you interested in history or the Civil War or Gettysburg was the Killer Angels or the Gettysburg movie, raise your hand, say I or say me in the feed. We'd love to see some of those people coming through. Now, the Killer Angels is by far his best known work, your father's, but in a way, he has another famous work that hardly anyone knows that he wrote and was also turned into a baseball movie. One of our viewers asked, of course, explain if you could, what was this? And then how true was the movie to the book?
Well, the book is For Love of the Game. And the original title that he had was Billy Boy, and they threw that out. And at the time of his death, the book was unpublished, and I mean nobody would touch it. Baseball was out of fashion in the 80s. Well, after his death, my mother and I, my sister, we took this thing to New York. It was published. Universal Pictures jumped on it. Kevin Costner showed a huge interest in this project, and it took a few years, which is what happens in Hollywood. And the movie came out in 1999, and it's called For Love of the Game. I'm actually in the movie, which that's my sole claim to fame in Hollywood. But I mean, the movie was extremely successful. Kevin Costner, Kelly Preston, John C. Reilly, J.K. Simmons. I mean, it's a wonderful cast, and it's just, as I said before, what my father would want. It's a good story. It's a baseball story. It's a romance. And those aren't, I mean, that seems like an odd combination, but it worked with the movie. And a lot of people have told me it's my favorite movie. But as you said, people have no idea that the book was written by Michael Shaara and it was drawn on his book. Now, the second part of what you said, the movie and the book are very different only because the book is so short. You could read the book in an hour and a half. So there are things in the movie that are not in the book. It's expanded a little bit. I'm not in the book, but I'm in the movie. So, you know, no, it's a really good film based on a really good book. And you know, that's two movies based on my father's books that he didn't live to see, you know, twice. So again, big footsteps.
Indeed. Yeah, and everybody, a lot of people are joining in saying me. So they did get inspired by his work, which is really great. And I do want to transition a little bit over to your fans and before we announce some of the first book winners as well. You know, I just want to note that I've seen it before, both in person and on your website. You actually interact with your readers and fans. You want their input, and that's not the case with every writer. How do you feel that? Why do you have that relationship?
Well, first of all, any writer, and I meet a lot of writers, I mean, a lot of authors, book festivals and places like that. And the question I would ask them is if you don't, you know, you're not interested in, and I hear all this stuff, oh, I don't personalize books, I don't talk to people, you know, and all of that stuff. My question for them is why? I mean, you know, if someone's willing to read your book, why wouldn't you want to know what they think? Why wouldn't you want to know, you know, if your book resonated with somebody, if there's something that moved them or it was an emotional response? And that just baffles me that anybody out there would take that kind of an attitude. I love hearing from people. Obviously, if every person I heard from had something bad to say, I probably would not want to hear from people. But, you know, I mean, I get through my website, I mean, jeffshaara.com. I welcome emails and I answer every one. It may take me 2 or 3 weeks to get to it because I get a fair number of emails, but I read them all, absolutely, and I answer every one that I can. So, you know, if anyone, there's a link, contact Jeff Shaara. It's right there on the homepage of the website. Please, if you have something to say, and as I say actually in the note at the beginning of the website, I respond to all of them, even the grumpy ones. And, you know, occasionally there's a grumpy one, and okay, that's fine. So no, I can't imagine not wanting to talk to people who are reading my books.
I think that's just great. And you're a better man than I am. I can't get to all of mine, and I doubt I get 1/50th the number that you get. So, you know, speaking of this, you know, so we see these people, your fans, and we have all these trust fans who are no doubt set up for so many questions because they're fans of yours. We're going to announce our first two. Zoom Goes the History, Jeff Shaara book prize winners. And the first two are Richard Poffel from Baltimore, Maryland, and Linda Sweeney from New Eagle, Pennsylvania. You've got some signed Jeff Shaara books coming your way, and we will write to you, given the email you gave us. Hang on to hear the other three signed book winners as we go along. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. This is Zoom Goes the History, and we're with Jeff Shaara on this special interview talking about all sorts of things and trying to get some of your questions asked. And I'm going to continue with one of the most prolific questions that we got. Literally scores asked questions about you know, what you plan to write in the future. And I'll say that, you know, I'll ask you first, do your fans actually help to affect what you write? And then I'll break out some of the places they suggested you write about.
Well, I sort of manipulate the data there, because what happens if my publisher is not 100% convinced that the idea that I want to write about is a good idea. I mean, the publishers like, and they do this a fair number of times where they're like, well, you know, I don't know if there's an audience for that story, or you know, what will happen, whether the book will sell. And then I'll say, well, you know, I just got 82 emails saying, you know, I hope you write this story. I may not have gotten all 82 of them in one day, Maybe it's over the course of a year or two, but at least I have data. So at least I can show my publisher, no, there are people who care. There are people interested in the story. The Korea book is the perfect example. The Frozen Hours, the book came out a couple of years ago on the Korean War, and people, people in New York were like, who cares? Who cares about the Korean War? Unless you're a fan of MASH. And I disagreed, and this book ended up, I think it's my best book. It ended up winning 3 different awards, and was very successful. So they're not right all the time. I'm not right all the time, but at least we have that interaction.
That's just great. And, maybe it might be helpful at this time to, outline some of what you've done, because I think a lot of people, maybe especially here, might know they might know Killer Angels, Last Full Measure, Gods and Generals, and Civil War Battlefields. And your, of course, 4-book trilogy. I know you like saying that, about the Civil War in the West, but, so over 25 years, you've written 17 books. You seem to like the 19th century the best so far, but with the 20th century coming really up close in terms of number of books. And you've dabbled in the 18th century as well. So could you go through kind of these book series a little bit, Jeff?
Sure. I mean, and I have to laugh because one of the things that happens is somebody will mention one of my books and I forget the title. Because when you get 17 books, I mean, and it's a weird thing that's like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, what was the name of that book? No, I started with Civil War, but to do it chronologically, I did a 2-book set on the American Revolution, which I'm very happy about. Rise to Rebellion and the Glorious Cause. Then I went, I did the Mexican War, a book called Gone for Soldiers, because when I'm doing research on the Civil War characters, they're all, so many of them got their start in Mexico, fighting in the Mexican War on the same side, together, all wearing a blue uniform, fighting against Santa Anna. And then to get to the Civil War, Gods and Generals, and then, of course, my father's book is the centerpiece of a trilogy. So it's Gods and Generals, Killer Angels, and The Last Full Measure. And then going after that, I wanted to get into the 20th century. So To the Last Man, World War I, The Red Baron, the Lafayette Escadrille, Blackjack Pershing. I had so much fun with that story. Then to go to World War II, I did a trilogy in Europe. And then I got yelled at by a bunch of Marines who said, we're not in Europe. How about telling the story, on the other side of the world? And that's true, actually. And so I did a 4th book, The Final Storm, on the end of the war in the Pacific, Okinawa and the bomb. And it's, then Korea, again, chronologically, I have to stop and think about it for a second. Chronologically going to Korea. Then I went back to the Civil War because I had heard from so many people west of the Appalachians that, gee, nobody ever talks about us. It's all Robert E. Lee in Virginia. So I did a 4-book, and you were referring to the 4-book trilogy. Publishers love, I'll have to tell this story. Publishers love trilogies. I don't know why, but it sort of fits their programming. And I was going to do a trilogy, The War in the West, Shiloh, Vicksburg, and then go to Sherman's March. And I realized it's too much history because I can't miss Chattanooga. I have to cover, Chickamauga, Chattanooga. So it ended up, so I went back to the publisher and said, I need to do a 4-book trilogy. And they went along with it. So there was that 4-book set. And again, Shiloh, Vicksburg, Chattanooga, and Sherman's March. And now going back to, again, because I make the Marines happy, and also because an awful lot of Navy people have written me and said, gee, you've never done anything on the Navy. So I went back and I'm doing a new series on World War II in the Pacific, starting at the beginning. And so it's Pearl Harbor, To Wake the Giant. This book comes out in about 3 weeks. Comes out May 19th. Very happy. And it's the first of what probably will be 2, perhaps 3. I love the cover of this book. I give Random House credit, their art department credit for that. It sort of jumps right out in your face. And so the question now is what's next? And I'm doing the research on Midway, which follows Pearl Harbor pretty closely. And the publisher's already on me for a title. They do that. They want to get out there, and start marketing and all that stuff. So I said, okay, if the Pearl Harbor book is called To Wake the Giant, The next book should be, see, I told you not to wake the giant, but I don't think they're going for that one either.
This is great. I'm seeing so many people. Ron just said, I've read every single one of your books. I see somebody named Stephanie Shaara is watching now, which is really interesting. And then there's other people learning about other of your books that they didn't know about. So I'm really glad to see this.
I'm hearing laughter from the other rooms.
Good, good. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. This is Zoom Goes to History. We're with Jeff Shaara, and we're talking about his books and a lot of the questions that you've asked. So let me just tell you how busy our constituency actually wants to keep you. So here's the books they wanted to know if you are going to write about. The Battle of Franklin and the Civil War, the navies of the Civil War, the French and Indian War, Vietnam, 1812, the Spanish-American War, the Gulf War, and alternative histories as well. And are you going to make more movies? So, Jeff?
Well, first of all, I'll answer the last question first, because that's an easy one. It's not up, and I've had people get mad at me. How come you haven't made The Last Full Measure, for example, the third movie in the Civil War trilogy, as though it's up to me? And I tell people, when you're talking about a $60 to $100 million budget, I don't have that. And so it's never up to, the author to get his book made into a movie. I would love to see, all of my stuff made into movies, but that's not up to me. It's up to Hollywood, someone in Hollywood. But to go back, to the laundry list, and boy, it is a laundry list of stuff. 1812 is one of those subjects. It could be a trilogy of books. Publisher's not going for that. They've already said that you can't do 3 books on the War of 1812. So would it be a 3-part book? But I think that would be a terrific story. French and Indian War as well. One thing I would like to do is Napoleon. I've been asked, about if there's a story that's not an American story. Well, Napoleon is a fabulous story. Vietnam is coming. That's definitely, I get a lot of input on Vietnam. A lot of veterans have written me, sending me fabulous material. It's wonderful. And the hardest question there is, what's the story? Because it can't be the war. I mean, it's 15 years. And it can't be the politics. I don't want to get into Nixon, LBJ, McNamara, Westmoreland. So it needs to be that small story with the guys out in the bush. That's a hard selection to make. I was going to do the Cuban Missile Crisis, and a lot of people asked me about that. I ran into a brick wall. My publisher sort of got ahead of themselves and put a cover and a title out there. So people keep writing me saying, where's the Cuban Missile Crisis story? It was never written. And it's a story that's tense and a lot of anguish and concern and terror and all of this for 9/10 of the book, and the last 10, everybody goes home and it's over. So that, if you didn't live through it, as I did, it's going to be like, well, the story just sort of fizzles out at the end. So I'm not doing that one. The Gulf War, I don't know. That's too modern. I mean, what I said about politics, I don't like politics. I don't want to write about politics. And there's no way to escape that with the Gulf War. Other stories, not military stories, I'd like to tackle. Lewis and Clark. It's been a lot. It's been 25 years since Stephen Ambrose did Undaunted Courage, so it's not a long enough time. And so I think that's a story. The Klondike Gold Rush. There's a story nobody. If you watch John Wayne in North to Alaska, you still don't know the story. There's a lot of good stuff. The women involved in that story is spectacular. What they did. I mean, there, many of I would love to do a prohibition story. Not Al Capone and Elliot Ness. I mean, that's been done just a few times, but something in that era. So I mean, there's I don't know how long I'm going to live. But there's a huge laundry list, and I don't know how long I'll have the energy to keep writing books. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff I want to do. The Civil War, returning to the Civil War, you said the 2 things that I probably would look at. One is the Battle of, and it would actually be Franklin and Nashville. I'd do the 2 together. And the other one would be the Navy story. And in this case, I think that the Ironclads would probably be the story to do.
You certainly have a life's work ahead of you, and maybe an extra lifetimes of work ahead of you.
It gives me something to talk about with my publisher. I mean, and again, the input you've gotten from people asking the question, people care. I mean, that's amazing to me. I'm thrilled when someone says, please write about, this subject or that subject. I mean, that's a really nice thing.
So before I move on to, a little bit heavier stuff, a lot of people wrote in wanting to know your opinion on Pearl Harbor. Before we get into that, I'm not going to say who asked this question, but what's the deal with your surname here? There are 3 A's or 2 R's. Is it always pronounced right? What's going on there?
There's only 1 R, but there are 3 A's. No, Shaara originally was spelled Sciarra, Shaara. Or some people say Sciarra, that's not right. It's Shaara. It's Italian. My family came over from Benevento, Italy, outside of Benevento in 1902, settled in Jersey City. My grandfather was one of 8 brothers and sisters, and he was born in Italy along with the next brother in the family, Raffaella. And we were a typical Italian-American family in the early part of the 20th century. Every one of them worked hard, did fabulous things with their life, raised children. My father, therefore, is a first-generation American, and I'm second generation. The spelling, there's all kinds of debate on how the spelling was changed. But I'm always happy to tell what the original spelling is, because I mean, I respect the heritage of my family, and we're a close family, even though we're scattered all over the place. I've got cousins in California, cousins in New York, cousins, one of my cousins, I will say this, one of my cousins, Rich O'Brien, is a professor at the Naval Academy. So I mean, and people in Florida, I mean, loads of people, and Texas, and just all over. It's cool, it's cool to have a relationship with your family. My sister's in Pittsburgh. So, we keep up, and Facebook has done that. Facebook has gotten us in touch in a way that we never would have before. So it's family means a lot to me. And maybe it's a cultural thing, and it's an Italian thing, but that's where the name comes from.
Well, I was going to get into Pearl Harbor, but let's hold that off for a second and follow that up a little bit. So, in the 80s, you were pretty well known in Florida as a coin dealer. But then all of a sudden, in the 90s, you start writing and you're on the New York Times bestseller list more than a dozen times in a row. And this has to have changed your life. So if family's important, how have you found that sort of balance with public figure and personal Jeff? Because I know you to be a regular guy.
Well, thanks. I mean, I take that as a compliment. I mean, we've talked about the crowds, going out to see fans and all that stuff, and doing the book festivals, and I do a book tour every time a book comes out, and I go out around the country. I hope, I said this, there's 2 friends of mine, one is Pat Falsey, who portrayed A.P. Hill in the movie Gettysburg, a very good friend of mine. And I told him one day, I said, if you, and I'll set the setting is, I had just been on the Today Show, and I was on the cover of USA Today. And of course, we made a joke that, well, today it's all about me. But I said to Pat, I said, if you ever see me in an audience setting, sitting there talking to people, pontificating, or like, well, my books are important because I said, reach across the table and slap me. I said, because I never want to be that guy. And I've met a few of that guy. Why? Again, what I said before about not wanting to talk to fans. Why would I want to do that? Why would I want to alienate anybody by being a jerk? So, that's what matters to me is just, I'm grateful for the fact that I'm writing books, and my father, is not able to, because had he been alive, through the 90s and beyond, he would have probably written these books. I never would have been a writer. So I have to take that seriously. And again, what you said about the bestseller list, I don't go around touting that, but I know how tough that is. And I know how many writers look at me and say, gee, I wish. Well, that's nice to hear, but I'm never going to lord that over anybody and say, oh, well, again, my books are important because, no, it's just not who I am.
And I've always really liked that about you. And you never know what you're going to experience when you meet somebody. So, I'll just say thank you for being that way. It's a good model for us all. So let's get into your coming book. It's coming out in just a few weeks. You can pre-order it on Jeff's website. We're going to post this link in the Facebook feed here, and here's a picture of it coming up. But maybe you could do two things, Jeff, if you're willing. I see it looks like I'm getting one. Could you maybe summarize, or tease this book a little bit, and then answer the question we got more than any other about history, at least? Did Roosevelt know? Was there advanced warning of this attack, Jeff?
Yeah, it's sad that I get that question a lot. I'll talk about that in a second. But to summarize the book, what the book is not is page 1, bombs are falling on ships. That would be easy to do, but there's a whole lot more to this story than bombs falling on ships. I don't know how many pages you can do of that without just putting people to sleep. You can't have that much. First of all, you can't have that much blood and guts, which I don't like to do. It needs to be more of go back to what my father said, tell a good story. And the point of this is to talk about, there are 4 primary characters. You've got in Washington, D.C., because that's where a big part of the story takes place, you have Cordell Hull, Secretary of State under FDR. I've got his memoir, 2-volume memoir, fabulous. He was there, right in the middle of it, of what happened in Washington, and not all of it's perfect by a long shot. Then you've got the kid who ends up joining the Navy and ends up in Pearl Harbor, and what he goes through. The 19-year-old who's looking to get out of Depression era, small town Florida. You've got, some of the people in Pearl Harbor. You've got the Joe Rochefort, who's the man who figures out, who's desperately trying to figure out how to break the Japanese military codes. And you've got, Admiral Kimmel, who's in Pearl Harbor. You've got, you've got the Japanese spy in Pearl Harbor. Guy, who works for the embassy there, or the consulate there. What he goes through, what he's seeing. And then, to me, probably most important, you've got the other side. You've got Admiral Yamamoto. This is his plan. He's the one who comes up with this plan. He's the one who's going to, and the picture you're showing there is Dan Martinez, who is the chief historian out at Pearl Harbor for the National Park Service, who I dedicated this book to. He was a godsend. He did so much in terms of resources and just talking to me about all these things, and met with him twice, and she'll hate me. That's my wife's foot there at the bottom right-hand corner of that photograph. But being in Pearl Harbor, walking around and seeing, I was able to go out to the Arizona before they closed it. And if that doesn't move you, nothing will. It's a story. I get very excited talking about this because, but all of this starts, the book covers a year, December 1940 to December 1941. And so that, that year before the dropping of the bombs on the ships, will tell you what happened, why, and why it's important. And hopefully it's a good story.
Good. So not to let you escape, so why shouldn't people think that there's a, some sort of a cover-up or a advanced warning?
There have been books written about the conspiracy theory business. And actually one of them, and I won't mention his name, but he's a fairly well-respected historian, writing books that, FDR knew that the Japanese were going to bomb Pearl Harbor, and he didn't tell anybody in Hawaii. Well, first of all, that's murder. That simply is not true. And I know these books are out there, and people have already been writing me with that question. And I'm really sorry that if you believe that, in your heart of hearts, that you think that was the case. Roosevelt had a lot of enemies. Some people take for granted that FDR was like the most popular president in the 20th century. There were a lot of people hated it. And a lot of people sort of pushed that notion that, well, surely, because I think one of the problems too is the level of stupidity and the level of blindness and on almost every person's part prior to the bombs falling on the ships is astonishing. And whether it's the admiral in Pearl Harbor, the army general out there, Walter Short, whether it's, George Marshall, the chief of staff in Washington, on and on and on. I mean, you can go all the way down the list of people who were just blind and didn't see it. And part of it, and I hate to say this, part of it's racism. We didn't believe that those little yellow guys with the thick glasses and the buck teeth were capable of doing anything. And there's some quotes. I put quotes throughout the book on section headings. And these are real quotes. I mean, this is what the newspapers were saying, what the generals and the admirals were saying. Oh, don't worry about it. They're not going to do anything. And the other myth, and I'll just touch on this, and I don't want to be too long on this, Gary, but it's a myth that we had broken the Japanese code, and therefore we knew everything they were going to do. No, we broke the purple code, which is the diplomatic code. So we knew what the embassies were saying to Tokyo and back and forth. We knew all of that, but that had nothing to do with the military codes. And that's what Joe Rochefort was trying to break in Hawaii, and not to give, I'll give something away. For Midway, he did break the codes, which is why we won the Battle of Midway. So that just shot the whole next book. But I mean, the misinformation and the sort of fudging of the facts and fudging of the history, that's a shortcut for an author. And it really bugs me when guys do that, because people will read something in a book and they'll say, oh, this must be true. Not necessarily.
I think that's really great. You actually set up my next question, really well. You don't have to, as somebody who writes historical fiction, there's a pretty wide berth in there. It could be, 95% accurate and 5% fiction, or it could be the reverse. You seem to know what you're talking about. Why are you that kind of writer? Why are you dedicated to, quote unquote, getting it right with the history?
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is to that, but you did hit it on the head. I mean, I've had actually the late Bud Robertson said to me once, he said, you have a huge advantage over what I do. He said, you can write anything you want. I'm writing to get, I have to get every single fact perfect, or I'll get grief. But as writing fiction, you can do anything. Well, maybe. But that's just not what I do. And maybe what I try to do is in between. It's enormously important to me to get it right, get the facts straight. Don't screw around with history. And so I do an enormous amount. I wish I could show you right here on my right. Is the bookshelf with the stuff that I read for Pearl Harbor and the stuff I'm reading for Midway. I've got to get the facts straight. And that's I'm on an airplane there. Thanks, Steph. but no, so in other words, that's my first goal is to get the facts, get the timeline straight, figure out who the characters are going to be. That's the second step. Who are the voices? And in order to hear those, one of the things I noticed yesterday when I was looking at the questions you have, a lot of people ask, how do you pick the characters? Well, that's a huge challenge, because first of all, they need to be the characters that work in the story, that put you there. But also they need to be the characters that I feel comfortable putting words in their mouths, because that's an enormous challenge. And actually, I'll have to say this, I've said this many times before. Someone said to me a long time ago, how dare you put words in the mouth of Robert E. Lee? Fair enough. Challenge accepted. If I dare to put words in the mouth of, Admiral Yamamoto, they better be the right words, because people care. And there's documentation out there. So that, that's why the facts have to be straight. But what makes my books fiction, novels, is the dialogue. And that's another question, why are your books novels? That's why, because you're there. As opposed to a historian who tells you what happened, maybe in great detail. My job is to take you with me and put you in the room so that you're hearing what happened. And you're there. And I love some critic said, actually this critic said of The Killer Angels, I felt when I read that book, I felt for the first time I knew what the Civil War smelled like. Like, good, bingo, because that's my job, is to show you what it smells like. So that's, that's the line that it runs down the middle of what I do. And the other part I have to mention is, Gary, when I started hearing from teachers who were using my books in their classroom, what an incredible compliment that is. But then I also realized, okay, get the facts straight, because I don't want a teacher standing up telling kids, high school students, 11th graders usually, read this and this will tell you what happened if I've gotten it wrong. I mean, so that's another reason why I pay a lot of attention to that.
Good, man. We only have about 10 minutes left or so, and we've got an hour worth of content to cover because you've just mentioned so many good things. But first, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. This is Zoom Goes the History. This is a special interview with Jeff Shaara, who has a new book coming out in a few weeks. You can click the link on it if you want to learn more about Pearl Harbor. And I see some of you have already pre-ordered it during this live broadcast. Thank you very much. And again, thank you all for watching here. So, which one to go with next? I think that what's interesting, what you said, was that you're trying to get people to know what things smelled like. And that's why you have this great responsibility to get it right. You've chosen as your method, almost, you almost don't have a choice to do so, but to go through the people, to understand the people and to tell that story through people. And one thing that you said with the Pearl Harbor time was that, that this was rampant racism at the time. I often say that about the Civil War, that it's not South bad, North good. This is a nation that does not feel the same way about race as we do today. And you were saying something similar. So how do your characters help us sort of better empathize and understand people of the past?
Well, first of all, it's the main reason that I always bring in the other side. It's the main reason why Admiral Yamamoto and his staff and different people that were working with him, Minoru Genda, who's the brilliant mind on the Japanese side who pushes for aerial warfare. He designs, the airplane attacks. Great people, great characters. And if you've got on the other side, a billboard, with the buck teeth and the thick, glasses, with some racist comment, talk about missing the point. And you mentioned North and South Civil War. I'll give you one more, and that was the Germans in World War II. Okay, it's easy to say, well, the Germans were the bad guys. Yeah, absolutely. But I did 2 books where the German character was Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, and the man who was in charge at the defense of D-Day, Normandy. What a great character. And I had people write me and say, I didn't want to like Rommel, but I can't help it. But yeah, I know, me too. So, and the Red Baron, and he's the German character in the World War I book. Fabulous character. So I think if we all realize, we're just people, and there are bad people and there are good people, and they're not always on one side. And so that's part of my job, is to find the characters and just tell you their story. Tell you the story the way they would tell it.
Good. So I want to touch on something else that you hit upon when you were talking about going to Pearl Harbor and being at the Arizona and seeing how moved you are. And I know you know where I'm headed now. You've gone to most of the places, or as many as you could, that you've written about. So why is it important to visit the places? And of course, why is it important to preserve those places?
Well, first of all, I do have to say, because this is sort of funny, the one place I did not go and could not go in the Korea book, the Chosin Reservoir, it's in North Korea. So there was a consensus in my family, no, you're not going to North Korea, even if I could. But no, the lesson I learned from my father in 1964 as a 12-year-old walking the battlefield in Gettysburg, that little, wandering around the field, walking Pickett's charge, that changed his life. That started his odyssey to producing The Killer Angels. He became obsessed with telling that story. He knew a good story when he saw one. That lesson has never left me. And every chance I've had in every book I've done, I try, and of course with Civil War, it's much easier because thanks to the trust and others, the battlefields are in enormous part conserved. You can go there. My favorite place, and I know this gets, we have conflict in my home. My favorite place is Shiloh. I love Shiloh. It's 98%, conserved exactly the way it was. Obviously Gettysburg, obviously Antietam, there are, many, clearly. I've been all over Bentonville, North Carolina, and Chickamauga, and I could name them all, but I don't need to. Vicksburg. Being able to walk the ground, not just as an author, as the family. One reason I wrote my Battlefields book, which you just put on the screen, is what Jim Lighthizer, your president, coined as the backseat people. And the idea of this book is to reach, the front seat people. Think about a car with a family in it driving around Gettysburg. The people in the front seat, they're looking at every monument, every cannon. They already know what happened. The people in the back seat are probably saying, "Oh, can we go get lunch now?" No, here's the book for the back seat people. I want people to realize that you don't have to be a history nut. You don't have to be a Civil War buff. This is valuable ground. And I say this in the introduction to that book, just like the zoo is not the jungle, so the museum is not the battlefield. With all due respect to museums, get out there, get out on the ground, because in the case of Gettysburg, for one, it will change you. And and you will appreciate the value of that ground. And when you see a strip mall in a place where there's a plaque saying something incredibly important happened here, you get the point of what the trust is trying to do, is to preserve that land and keep the strip malls off land that they don't need to be.
Good. And let the record show we did not pay Jeff Shaara to say that or anything like that. And let me just thank everybody for watching. We've already gotten 460 comments or so just during this time, and we still have a couple of books to award. And I want to say that we have people from the United States, and the farthest one that I've seen, at least, Slovakia, is watching as well. So thank you for joining us. You served on the American Battlefield Trust, then Civil War Trust, and Civil War Preservation Trust board for 7 or 8 years. Is there anything you want to say about the business of preservation? I mean, here we are always, we're holding Zoom sessions so that we can actually, get more people interested in our subject, and maybe they'll support us. So what did you kind of learn as a trustee?
I mean, one thing I will say right off the bat is one of the, sometimes when you read something negative about the trust, I mean, there's a piece of land in question. This happened in Gettysburg a few years ago. And people sort of, let angry letters to the editor that the trust is coming in here and taking our land. I'm sorry, that's not the way it works. The trust is contacted by landowners who want to sell their property. That's how it happens. And then you have some brilliant people, doing the actual negotiating, the real estate purchases. And then, the trust goes to people, just people, like, you and me, asking for donations. And, their money that they're raising is not going to, fund some giant office building or excursions to, around the world for the powers that be. No, it's to buy land. And it matters so much, because once the land is gone, you cannot get it back. So, I mean, besides being on the board, I support the trust, continually. And I implore people to get involved with this. If nothing, send them a check, $10, $50, whatever you can afford. It's worth it. And when you go to the ground, you go to some battlefield, you'll know that, you played a part in preserving that land. And like my father, you might be changed as well.
That's great, Jeff. Thanks so much for that passionate appeal. Chris White, who's running things behind the scenes, just flashed up our website, battlefields.org, of course, if you want to get involved. Now, let me also say that, I'm interviewing you, but behind the scenes, we've had a number of people helping. I already mentioned Chris White, who actually conceived and, is the father of Zoom Goes to History. So thanks, Chris. We've got Larry Swader and Connor Townsend helping out on Facebook. Lucy Hockman, Mary Coik have been helping to get the word out, and a host of other people. So it's like Jeff said, we have all these people behind the scenes doing the actual work instead of the fun work that we're getting to do right now. So I want to announce our winners of our last 3 signed Jeff Shaara books. We will contact you via the email you gave us. So Mitch McCampbell of Knoxville, Tennessee, Ron Dries of Houston, Texas, and Wendy Rufenacht, if I got that right, of Bel Air, Virginia. You have some books coming if you respond to the emails that we send you before too long. So I guess I want to wrap things up by asking you one last question, and that is, you know, you're going to hate answering it, but a lot of people ask, who's your favorite character you've written about so far, Jeff?
All of my finger, right there on the wall behind me, that's Benjamin Franklin. It's a wax impression of Franklin's portrait right there. That's my character. And the thing is, I mean, you know, it's not like he's up here and everybody else is down here. But Franklin changed the world. He changed history, and he's fun. He was a funny man, and he was so much fun to put into my books. But then, you know, I look at Grant, I look at Winfield Scott. Again, I mentioned the Red Baron. On and on and on. I mean, there are so many that I could talk about. And that's part of the fun of what I do, is I get to get in these guys' heads and put words in their mouths and words that I believe. So it's, yeah, but that guy right there is probably number one.
I thought you were going to get mad at me for that question. So thanks for such a direct answer. Jeff, thanks you so much for joining us today. I know everybody enjoyed. I can tell from all the comments. 2 people already suggested that we need to hold a part 2 or a part 3 to this interview. We'll leave that up to Jeff. But make sure you go out, look for To Wake the Giant. You can pre-order it on the screen that you see right now. That's at jeffshaara.com. That's 3 A's and 1 R. .com, and do that. And of course, we really appreciate you joining in today. Thanks to everybody behind the scenes. Thank you to you, Jeff, and to your family who helped set up tech support. And thank you to all of you for supporting battlefield preservation.
Thank you, Gary.